Hi, this is Trev and welcome to my blog. Welcome to part 2 in my mini-series on MIG welding. In part 1 I showed you how to match the wire speed with a voltage stroke power setting, and in part 2, this part, I'm going to show you how to do some plug welding, some butt welding, welding dissimilar thickness materials, and also a little bit of an overview on the difference between MIG welding and TIG welding on car bodywork. This whole series has come about off the back of all the questions that have been asked me personally over the last couple of years. So there's a good chance your question is going to be answered in this mini series. I hope you enjoy it. From time to time people ask me about welding dissimilar thicknesses of steel together. This isn't something I've done very often, I must confess, but on the occasion I have, this simple procedure really always works for me. What I do, and we are talking about a lap joint here as well. I can't think that anyone would want to be butt jointing something really thick to something thin. But if it's a lap joint and the thinner stuff's just burning away and you're getting no penetration on the thick stuff, just simply weld along the edge. Don't weld into the joint, weld a little bit back. So you see this Sharpie line along here. I'm going to weld along this Sharpie line, aiming the torch into the joint, and what this will do is it will cause the weld to spill out and the edge of the thinner material will be absorbed into the weld. It will just simply, that molten puddle will just simply melt the edge of the thinner stuff and just join it, just fuse the two together, and it'd be perfectly satisfactory. No drama there, just welded it straight across. Like I said, it's just spilled out and absorbed that lighter panel into the weld. I'll put it in the vise and we'll wiggle it backwards and forwards and see what happens. Ah, it's not going anywhere, is it?
Not really.
So I've straightened this back out after I've snapped it off. It's sheared on fresh metal. You can see that because of the way it's stepped each side. So it's stepped around the weld. So it's broken off the weld, and you can see that that's absolutely fresh metal along there. So that was successful. Like I say, input your heat into the thick part, allow the weld to spill out and to absorb the thinner material, to save you just blowing the thinner material away to nothing. So I hope that's that question answered for those people that keep asking. Plug welding, always receiving lots of messages about plug welding, and it's nothing more really than a lap joint. So we've got a lap joint, we've got two pieces of metal, one sat on top of the other, and we can weld these two pieces together by drilling a hole or making a hole in the top layer, then overlapping them like that, welding through the hole into the layer underneath and plugging the hole up, hence the phrase plug welding. So once that's plugged up with weld, you can then just grind it off and produce a completely invisible weld. It looks quite nice because it can almost look like it's like a kind of original spot welded panel, and it's great for being able to weld in places where a spot welder wouldn't reach. So even if you have a spot welder, invariably you will need to plug weld at some stage because you just won't have the attachments to be able to get into certain positions. This is an enormously popular tool. It's a hole punch. So this is a 5mm hole punch, which a lot of people use for plug welding. A word of caution, I'm not very confident using these things, as I've seen failures in the past where people have welded panels on and they've plug welded all the way along. So this is made with the hole punch. So this is a 5mm hole, and if you see the size difference between the 5mm and the 8mm, you might be able to kind of appreciate that it's very easy to end up just welding the top surface and the weld doesn't penetrate through that tiny little hole to behind. And if you're welding from underneath, so you're welding uphill, it's almost impossible to get any penetration through into the panel behind. In my experience, this is in my experience, as I say. What you can buy is you can buy spot weld drills. So this is an 8mm spot weld drill. If you've never seen one before, this is what they look like. It's essentially a flat cutting drill with a little spike in the centre to centralise the hole. So that little spike drills in first and then it cuts a nice flat hole. Purposes really for spot weld drills is to remove old spot welds so that you can remove the panel, and these are really marvellous for making really nice round accurate holes in sheet steel, because of course when you try and drill a hole sometimes in sheet steel you don't get a round hole, and these always ensure you get a round hole. These are available in 6mm, 8mm and 10mm. Maybe other sizes, I'm not sure, but they're the sizes I've got. And what I would do personally, if I was going to use a hole punch, I've found that I can make really, really good spot welds by just budging up the size slightly. So if I use the hole punch to make my 5mm hole, I can just simply get a 6mm drill bit and just whop it straight through, and it goes through in seconds, because of course we've already got a decent sized hole there already. And I just find that this ensures that I get a good weld, something that will go through to the other side easily and not just sit on the surface. To give you some size comparisons, I've cut some holes in some metal. So this is the 5mm punched hole and that's a 6mm drilled hole, and there is a big difference between those two in terms of being able to weld through the hole and contact with the panel behind. Even though it doesn't look a great deal and there's only a millimetre in it, that extra millimetre does seem to make all the difference. This is an 8mm and this is a 10. Wouldn't normally ever drill out anything to 10mm to do a plug weld, to be quite honest with you, but I just thought I'd show you the difference. I'd do an 8 if I wanted it super strong, and I go for 6 for most kind of run-of-the-mill things on classic cars. What I'll do next is I'll do a quick welding demo of how you do a plug weld. Just a quick tip, when I'm welding 8mm hole, because the hole's quite big, if I just stay bang in the centre of the hole, I'll invariably just burn straight through and blow a hole straight in the panel. So what I do when I've drilled an 8mm hole is I just do a circular weld, and as I go that just sews up that hole really, really nicely. Of course, on a smaller hole you haven't got that facility to be able to do that, so literally you've just got to aim for the centre of the hole and hope for the best that you just manage to hit the panel behind. And that's just a quick tip. That's just something that I just sort of thought I'd throw in there. Like I say, when I'm doing 8s, I just give it a bit of circular weld like that, and that ensures that I don't blow through behind, because I'm keeping the weld moving. I'm not just concentrating in one place. So I'll just weld these up, and then we'll have a look at them afterwards, see how they turn out. This is the 8mm side, and that paints a story, doesn't it? Might give these a bit of a wiggle, see if I can break them off. This is what I was worrying about, you see. Although they had welded, there's not enough of a large contact point to make much of a strong weld. It holds together quite well, but how well it actually holds together, particularly if you had a crash or something like that, you know, what's it going to do? Before I strength test these 8mm plug welds, I'll show you it cleaned up. So I'll clean these up. People are always asking me about that. So what I use is, the first thing I use to take the welds down anyway, these Cubitron 2 grinding discs, 36 grit. And these are the best discs in the world in my opinion. They last forever. They really last a long time. And I also use these Scotch-Brite cleaning strip wheels. They're really good for polishing up after you've done the angle grinder business. And I've got one of these on a die grinder, very effective. Also, if you don't want to go ripping in too heavy, you could also use like a little mini right angle die grinder with a roll lock attachment on there. So you've got little mini grinding discs. I think these are like 50 grit, so they're not as severe as these 36 grits. Also a surface conditioning disc as well for polishing. Wire brush in a drill, always handy. 10mm belt sander, excellent, and a 20mm belt sander. And these are all the things I regularly use for cleaning up my welds, making them look really nice. I got 2 sheets of 0.9mm or 20 standard wire gauge. Thickness material here, sort of outer skin panel size that I use mostly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to weld them together, so just do a standard butt weld using the Mig welder halfway along. I'm going to TIG weld the other half. We can see the difference in the type of weld. I'll have a little chat about that afterwards. Half MIG welded, half TIG welded. So I started on the edge and worked my way in when I was doing the TIG welding. You see I've got a lot more build right at the start because I was just a bit frightened really of just burning the edge out, because that's what happened. So I put a bit more rod into there. You can see I was getting into my stride here, and then I had to stop of course because I wanted to do the other half MIG welded, just to show you the build comparison really. This is what I was trying to show you here. So like I say, this is like a raw weld. I haven't cleaned it up or ground it down or anything. All I've done is I've simply removed the weld scale with a wire brush so you can actually see the weld. And if we flip it over the other side, it's a little bit hit and miss with the MIG welder. If I'd gone to the trouble of setting it up a bit better, I would have got a bit better penetration. But of course, more penetration, more heat distortion. The TIG weld doesn't look too bad either. You see it's penetrated all the way along really nicely. Got a tiny little crater there. But this side looks really good. Now, what I was trying to get, the point across I was trying to get is the amount of work you would then have to do afterwards to make this good as opposed to making that good. You can't planish this side. A lot of people say to me when they've seen me MIG welding stuff, you don't seem to beat the panel around. Well, you can't really effectively do that when you're MIG welding, because you've got this great big bead there which is rock hard. So if I was to try and straighten that out, what I'd probably do is just ruin the panel. So I'd have to grind it down first and then try and planish it out, which isn't always ideal. Now the TIG side, there's just no build there. There's nothing for you to bend that panel around. You haven't got a rock hard bead there. The weld is much softer. I can straighten that out. In fact, what I'll do now is get the hammer out. I'll straighten this edge out and try and show you what I mean. I can flatten that out quite nicely. I can't flatten this side out. I won't even attempt to do that. What I would do is just grind that off. The point really I'm trying to make here is that what I do is I use MIG weld and TIG weld. Horses for courses really. I was explaining this in my TIG welding series, which I never actually got round to getting to the point on that, so I'll make the point here that really you need both welders. So a MIG welder is absolutely ideal for stitch welding, for plug welding, for tacking things up and sort of trying them on. I use a MIG for that. It's brilliant for that. And use the TIG for butt joints. So TIG weld all my butt joints, and then anything that's underneath I could MIG weld if you haven't got to be too fussy. I mean, if it's a car you're just trying to get through an MOT and you had a hole up underneath the wheel arch, why would you bother TIG welding it? You just MIG weld it because it's so much quicker and easier. If it's something you're trying to make a beautiful job of, some classic car you're trying to restore and you're doing the outer skin panels, then TIG weld your butt joints on that, and stuff that's underneath chassis work and stuff you can MIG weld it, and that's why you need both welders. And that's what the point of this little bit has been all about. I'll just tap that up, see if I can get that to go a bit flatter for you to show you it's quite soft. and that's about it. I don't think I can show you much more. So there we go, with a little bit of planishing and a little bit of wire brushing. It's that's pretty near invisible now, isn't it? I mean, if I was to go to the trouble of putting a light grinding disc over there and polishing it out with a Scotch-Brite, stripping a clean wheel or the surface conditioning disc, it would just look like a flat sheet of steel. And I wire brushed it up because the welds stand out more now I've hit it with a hammer, look, because they go shiny. So I was just taking the shine off just to show you that it looks pretty flat. Incidentally, the TIG welding series I was just referring to, I haven't given up on that. I've stopped doing it because I thought it's just getting a bit tedious welding pieces of metal together in the vise. What I thought I'd do is combine the final couple of episodes into projects. So I've got a aluminium project that I want to do, so I thought it would look better if I was actually welding up a project whilst sort of explaining how the welder works. I thought that would work better than just welding, like I say, two pieces of aluminium together. And so that's what I thought I'd do anyway, so that's why I stopped doing those, because it was getting a bit soul destroying just welding two pieces of metal together. And I could really do with a practice anyway, because I'm quite new to TIG welding, I haven't been doing it that long, so it will be nice to sort of get a bit more brushed up before I do those episodes as well. I really must do a video sometime as well on welding pieces of metal together and planishing it out to get rid of the heat distortion. So that's something else I need to explain, is the stretching out process of planishing, what you're actually doing. It's not just getting it flat, it's also stretching the material back out again. Talking about stretching, you can see that edge, look now, where I've hammered on the edge, you can see it's peaked out a little bit now, because I've stretched the metal in that area, and it was as far as I wanted to go. If I just kept hammering in, I would end up then with a dish on this side, because there would be too much material if I just kept on planishing it on that edge. But I just wanted to show you that the weld's quite soft, much softer than MIG weld. I'll try and hammer that. All I'm going to do is ruin the panel. Before I wrap this video up, I'm just going to grind these welds down. There's one last thing I want to talk to you about that I get asked about quite frequently. All ground off, and that panel is looking pretty perfect either side. Now this is the MIG welded side. This is what a lot of people come to me and ask about. Unfortunately, I don't think the camera's going to pick it up that well, because I can see it better with my eyes than I can on the screen of the camera. But this is the MIG weld along here. So that's the MIG weld. So I'm right in the centre of the MIG weld with that bit of welding rod. And just to the right, there's some like little pits. See, just there? Only just about visible really, and occasionally you'll see like a little pit between the spots of the MIG weld as well. A lot of people messaging me about this kind of situation, what shall I do? Well, what I wouldn't advise you do is just grind it down and then weld it up again, and then grind it down and weld it up again, keep going like that. All you're going to end up doing is making the panel as thin as tin foil. What I think you're far better off doing is perhaps maybe just taking the heads off the welds and then trying to fill in these little spots if you really feel like it's necessary. There's still going to be a huge amount of strength in that. If you've just got the odd speck here and there, I think from a strength perspective you're better off just leaving it than you are trying to address it to make it look perfect. the thing is, you can make something look perfect, but it can be as weak as hell, and other things can look really rough but be really, really strong. And that's the tricky situation with this kind of thing. There's always this balance between you wanting something to look perfect and something that is perfect, and the two don't necessarily go hand in hand. The other thing as well is, I mean, the whole thing's going to be primered, filled and painted and everything else over the top. You're not going to see what's going on underneath. I think we're all getting a little bit carried away with what welds are supposed to look like on car body work. There you can see a pit there, look. My advice to a lot of people is get some epoxy and brush it along your seam and let that go off really, really hard, and then just sand it out, and that epoxy will flow into those little pits and just seal them up, and there's going to be little, if no chance at all, of moisture getting in there and creating any sort of rust issue or anything like that. And like I say, it's much stronger to be left than it is to keep trying to plug these little holes and regrind it, because each time you regrind it, you're going to be taking material off the actual steel itself, not the weld, and you're just going to end up thinning your panel, and that's the last thing you want. That really is the last thing you want. Well, thanks very much for watching. I really hope you got something out of that. And in part 3, I'm going to be talking about the whole gas side of MIG welding. So I'm going to be talking briefly about the gas and what it does. I'm going to be talking about a regulator with the gauges. Also going to be talking about the advantages of using a flow meter. Save yourself a few quid there. I'm also going to try and demystify people that have got their knickers in a twist about the whole wire feed speed adjusting the amps. I'm going to try and untwist those knickers for you. This is the end of the practical side of the video. There is something else I'd like to talk about, but I appreciate that that's not going to be what everybody's interested in hearing about. So I'll just let you know that this is the end of the practical side of the video. I'll see you in part 3. If you've got any questions that haven't been answered, then you could always drop me a line and I'll try and answer those questions. A little while ago, I was talking in one of my videos about Ron Covell. So I suppose I described Ron Covell as more of a coach builder really than a kind of accident repair like what I've come from, my industry. And he certainly wouldn't be using a MIG welder to weld up car body work. He would most certainly be using a gas welder or a TIG welder, more likely a TIG welder I would have thought. And this is where you know, the two sort of things cross over, and I believe a lot of the confusion about things comes from all of this because I've worked in the accident repair trade all of my, you know, my whole career. I've been in the accident repair trade, and there's been a MIG welder in every garage that I've ever worked. There's never ever been a TIG welder, so you can see the difficulties that somebody like myself would have trying to sort of, it is quite a different trade really from sort of collision repair, and that world is changing so fast now. I mean, I've been out of that now for 6 years. I'd probably be out of my depth if I went back into it. Absolutely no chance of that happening. So yeah, I've got a absolutely fantastic thing happen a little while ago. A mutual friend of myself and Ron Covell, it turns out, sent me a little email and he said, "Trev, you do realise that Ron watches your videos?" I thought he was winding me up. I honestly thought that it was a bit of a wind up and he was just pulling my leg. And no, and he said, "No, I'm being absolutely serious. Ron Covell watches your blog, Trev, and he said he enjoys watching it. And if you'd like his email address, here it is, he'd love to hear from you." So I thought, well, you know, I mean, this is like a 16-year-old kid strumming away on his guitar on the end of his bed, and then there's a knock on the door, and it's his, you know, the rock star he's trying to emulate is at the front door. It's that kind of scenario. So I got a bit choked up about it actually. Anyway, for those people that are bound to ask again, this is the book that I read when I first talked about Ron Covell. So this is the book, okay? So you can see the title, because a few people said I didn't catch what it was. So there you go, sheet metal fabrication, ultimate sheet metal fabrication, featuring Ron Covell. There he is, and it was in this book that I bought to console myself, because I'd given up my restoration business. I had to, and I bought this book to console myself because I wanted to keep the passion going. I went back into the accident repair trade. Not talking about that anymore. And the other book, of course, William Longyard's book, the book that the author gave me himself. This is the book, if you'd like to check it out. I'm following Bill's project as well on Facebook, actually. He's building himself a replica Ferrari, which is something I'd like to do along those lines, but that's a story for another day. Anyway, yeah, Ron Covell. Getting back to Ron, I emailed him, and he instantly emailed me back and said how pleased he was that I bothered to message him, and it was yeah, quite a surreal experience. So we sent a few emails backwards and forwards, got to know each other a bit better. It all kicked off right at this, this time, this bloody pandemic thing that's going on now. So it seems to have put a stop to a lot of our plans, including Ron's, because he was doing a workshop tour around America, and that's sort of been pulled now, and hopefully be able to get back to that soon. So I was having a chat to Ron, and I said, there's quite a few questions I want to ask you, because going back to the whole thing, like where you started, like I've said, in the accident repair trade, that's where most of my hands-on experience has ever come from. All the metal shaping stuff's all stuff I've purely done off my own back. There's no metal shaping going on in the accident repair trade, not really. I mean, we may pop dents out and we fit brand new panels, but there's no buying a sheet of steel and manufacturing something from scratch, which is what really turns me on. That's what I really want to focus on now for the rest of my days, is getting into actually turning flat sheets of material into car panels, and it's a kind of artistic sort of sculpture kind of driven thing, because I'm quite interested in my fabricating my R-bits, my Tin Man and my little scooter you've probably seen in the outros are stuff that I've just done off my own back because I'm just interested, I'm just passionate about it. So once I got chatting to Ron via email, of course, I soon realised that he really is as nice a guy as he comes across in his videos. He said, if there's anything I can do for you, Trev, please let me know. I'll do anything to help you out. If you ever want to come over, I'll give you a tour of the area, anything, just let me know. So I said, to be honest with you, I'd really like to know the Ron Covell history, how you've arrived upon the path that you're following right now. And he said, well, I'll give you a Ron Covell history lesson. So he wrote out what had inspired him. I mean, this goes on for a long time. It's absolutely riveting and essential reading for somebody like myself. But what I'll do is I'll just sort of give you an overview of what he's told me. He won't mind me sharing this with you because I've already asked him. So he said, well, what inspired him right at the very start is he was still at school. He's interested in cars, buying magazines and stuff like we all have, I'm sure. And he said that he had an older brother, and his brother's friends were into their custom cars, building cars, and this is what sort of first planted that seed. He looked at their cars and thought, oh, this is what I want to do. This is absolutely brilliant. So he bought his first project whilst he was still at school. I mean, the American schooling system's vastly different from it is over here in the UK. When I went to school anyway, it was, yeah, you're 16 years old, off you go into the bleak wide world. But I know in America that they school people for quite a lot longer. I mean, when I've watched American films, there's school kids driving themselves to school and stuff like that, you know, and their schooling seems to continue on for a lot longer after, you know, until a lot later on. So he bought his first project before he left school, which was a Model A coupe, stuff of dreams, and he finished it a year after leaving school, and he was very proud of his achievements on it, but he wanted to do better and he wanted to continue on in this. He certainly hadn't got it out of his system. So he put himself through night school, where he did a welding course. So he did stick welding, oxygen acetylene and TIG welding, and then his parents decided that he needed to follow a career path, and they kind of for reading between the lines, they kind of ushered him down the path of doing an engineering degree, which unfortunately failed the degree. Of course he failed, he wasn't interested, was he? So off he went back to college to study art, because you know, obviously real artistic flair to the guy, and that's where his interests led. So he went to college, study art, and he also did alongside a series on body repair on vehicles. This left the door open for him to get himself a part-time job. So what he did is he went to work for a guy called Arnie Roberts. Now Arnie Roberts, in Ron's words, which is I thought it was quite funny actually, he said that he is a brooding and intense but creative Hawaiian guy. So sort of conjuring up images of a real stocky chap that's probably as wide as he is tall. And he said he was incredibly difficult to work with. He was demanding, critical and very erratic as well, and even stopped paying him after a while, poor Ron. And but he realised that, he thought, well, I'd just carry on turning up, because I'm learning so much off this chap. I mean, he sounds like a real character, and you know, he said he didn't have a lot of kit. And he would literally get sheets of aluminium and form them with his own body, you know. He just sort of wheel them into shape. And he said he wanted to learn more about aluminium, and he learned how to aluminium gas weld. When he finished there, he went to work for a company called Fiberfab. I think they may have been like a kit car manufacturer. I don't know 100%. But Ron went to work for them, hated working with fiberglass, and why wouldn't you? Awful stuff, absolutely itchy, and it's terrible stuff to work with, isn't it? But fortunately, he didn't have to do a lot of fiberglass work while he worked for them, because they wanted to get him to do a lot of metal shaping, which sort of suited him really well, and he worked there for around about a year or so, until something real pivotal happened. He got contacted by a guy called Kent Fuller. Now Kent Fuller was having Arnie Roberts build these bodies for the dragsters, because he's a dragster builder, and there was so much demand for the work, he needed Ron to make these bodies for him as well. And what he did is he had a shed on the side of his workshop. He cleared it all out. He put a folding machine in there and a metal shear. So he provided him with the equipment, but he said, "You're on your own, kid. I'm not employing you. This is going to be your own business, and I'm going to give you orders for these bodies, and I want you to fulfill these orders." He wouldn't take them on, and he gave him deadlines to get things finished, which is probably why I didn't take him on. So he said it was an amazing experience, particularly in the beginning, because he got to meet a lot of interesting arty people, probably quite eccentric types, people that I really appreciate. I mean, all the people I know that I really get on with, they're all a little bit crazy, you know. And they're the interesting people. They're not all about, you know, paying off your mortgage and what are you going to do with your pension and how much it's worth, and they're living life for the sake of living a life. They're not putting their whole present life experience on hold for some sort of illusory retirement plan. They're getting on and they're enjoying life and they're immersing themselves in it. That's how I personally think life should be led. The pressures anyway, in the end, of the impossible deadlines and targets and having to work 7 days a week to get things finished, and you know, the pressures just got too much in the end, and he walked away from it, and he went back to school and did a bachelor's degree for a couple of years and immersed himself in that. Now, after he finished his bachelor's degree, he opened up his own shop again. So he was back to running his own shop, building straight rods. And then he met a guy called Don Potts, who was a sculptor by trade, and he got involved with this Don Potts, who was going to be building one of these soapbox derby cars, and they got the students over to Ron's shop and they built this car in the pictures you can see now, and that's the car they built. And he said this guy was extremely influential in his life as well, and he then went back into the art side of things, and he tried to produce works of art and sell them, and after selling one piece of art in 8 months, he suddenly realised that he was on the wrong career path and that he really needed to get back to doing cars. And this is when he met Don Varner, a designer, and they built a car called the California Star, which was a scratch built car. He made all the tube chassis and the body complete, made everything, and it was an extremely famous car, and obviously launched Ron's career no end. After that, he went on to do major custom modifications to existing cars, so he was like modifying and customizing cars rather than building things from scratch. And he even confesses to having a lot of troubles with welding low crown panels on steel panels, so basically like when we repair lower half door skins and things like that. And he kind of had these new challenges where he was having to weld things that he'd never previously had to weld in that place, because he was building stuff from scratch, you know, or using aluminium. Suddenly he was sort of having to modify an existing steel panel, and he was running headlong into the distortion issues, of course, that, you know, we all have. Almost kind of like a reverse of what I've done, really. So anyway, after that, he took workshops with a lot of very famous people. A lot of them I don't know, I'm not aware of. I know, I've heard of Ron Fournier, of course, and there was a lot of other names that I didn't know besides. He did workshops with them, he learnt from them, then he started taking his own workshops. Of course, he was very famous for doing the custom cars and modifying things. Went on to write for various magazines, do the DVDs, and of course he's got heavily into doing workshops. He's still doing workshops today. Unfortunately, they've been pulled because of this awful virus thing, but he was in the middle of doing workshops when that got pulled. So, and that's what he's doing to this day. And to think that he started working on cars in the 1960s is absolutely amazing. And a little story he told me as well is, unfortunately, the great Arnie Roberts, the mad Hawaiian panel beater man, unfortunately he passed away, and Ron was in touch with a relative, and they said, just come down and take something from his workshop as a memento. So Ron went down to his old workshop, and he got a small selection of tools that he remembered using when he was there back in the 60s, when he was kind of getting his first toe in the water, you know, getting a bit of experience in the trade. And that pretty much takes us up to where he is today. So there you go. There's a very exceptionally brief overview of Ron Covell's history. I may have got a few things run the wrong way, and I've left tons out, and I'm sure he left even more out to what he told me, because he's done tons of things, you know, lots and lots of stuff. We were having a chat about doing videos for YouTube, because of course he's he's on YouTube, and I did mention to him that one of my favourite videos he'd done on YouTube in recent times was a radius bending one, where he puts a nice radius edge on a panel so that you can join two pieces of metal together with a nice radius edge rather than a completely squared off edge, and not using very much equipment at all. And he said that after he'd done that video, he'd come to the awareness that not everybody's got a huge shop full of equipment, and that he was going to sort of focus on doing more of those kinds of videos. So I'll put a link in the video description so you can go and watch the radius forming video anyway, and maybe you could subscribe to him, and hopefully, I really hope that he'll do some more of those kinds of videos, because they're incredibly inspiring. So thank you very much anyway, Ron. Thanks very much for your contact. It's really been an absolute pleasure to have spoke to you, even if it's through email, and I'm sure I'll be sending more emails backwards and forwards over the coming months and years. I really hope so anyway. And as I've said, I mean, Ron's one of these people that he's got the imagination and the insight, and he takes a piece of just flat material, be it aluminium or steel, and he's able to have the vision to create something that doesn't look like anything that's been kind of handmade, if you know what I'm saying. It ends up looking like a piece of art. So he can take something and he can shape it, and he can work out where all the different sections are going to be. So this air scoop that I'm showing you right now is made out of all these different sections, and then when it's welded all together and polished, if you look at it from the reverse, so if you looked at the end product, you'd have a very, very hard job if you hadn't had any previous experience in this kind of metal fabrication trade. You'd be extremely hard pushed to work out how that had been made from hand. And Ron's one of these people that can, like I say, they can turn a flat piece of material and sculpt it and make all the different sections and join it all together so you can't tell where it's been joined, and produce something that looks absolutely mind-blowing when it's finished, and like a piece of art, of course. So that was a quick introduction or reintroduction for most of you to the great Ron Covell. And I think I'll just wrap this video up here. I'll see you in part 3 of the Mig Welding video, and then we'll get back to some metal shaping, because I've got lots of projects in the pipeline, a couple of collaborations as well. I'll be doing a collaboration with a guy called Mark Bennett. Now Mark is a fiberglass expert, and we will actually be doing a metal shaping collaboration together. So that's something to look forward to. I won't go into any more detail on that one because I want it very vague to start with, and hopefully end up with something completely mind-blowing. I've also been working on a project for a collaboration project with a guy called Chris, who runs a company called Outline Displays, and what we're going to do together is one of those fantastic old vintage neon signs. So I'm going to make the metalwork side of things once we can finally thrash out what I'm going to do, and yeah, I'm going to do the metalwork anyway, and I can do that as a good project to show you how I'm going to take something that's made out of metal, I'm going to take it apart and turn it into a sign, and then we're going to have a nice neon sign made out of it, and I'm going to do it sort of vintage style. So that'll be something else that's coming up, and lots of other metal shaping things in between. So I'll see you in part 3. Bye for now.